Hello, let's talk about spring books. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney. If you are new here, I talk about books and writing. This video is going to be about all the spring vibe books I have to recommend to you. Before we start, a couple of pieces of housekeeping. One, if you are interested in following along my writing career, the books I have coming out, please sign up for my newsletter in the description. It comes with a free copy of The Forest Witch, which is a short, spicy paranormal romance between a witch and a warlock in the Pacific Northwest. And you'll also get all the latest updates about anything to do with books I have coming out. I put some book reviews in the newsletter, and the best thing is I only send you something once a month. So on to spring books. Spring books I think are really interesting because it is the season I feel like I most want to read a book that envelops me in spring. And I also think it's the season that's the least written about now, in modern times. I do think when you look back at stuff that's written in the 1800s, there are a lot of books that have spring vibes, but modern times books, I feel like autumn, summer, and winter just dominate when it comes to seasonal feelings. But I did find quite a few that I think you will enjoy, a lot of which have come out in the last year. So let's get right into it. First of all, nothing says spring like this cover. This is Wayward by Amelia Hart, and it is a magical realism and also a bit historical because we have more than one timeline. Before I review this has some pretty serious content warnings, and they are on-page sexual assault, on-page domestic violence, and on-page abortion in the past that is not, safe in any way, shape, or form. So go in knowing that. That all being said, I really enjoyed this book. This is about 3 different women in the same bloodline. We have Kate in 2019. She is escaping an abusive ex, and she goes to live in a cottage in the English countryside that her great aunt has left her, and her ex does not know it exists. And I shouldn't say ex. He's an abusive partner that she is currently with. Then in 1619, we have Altha, and Altha lives in England, and she is awaiting her trial for witchcraft. And then in 1942, we have Violet, who is the daughter of a aristocrat of some kind and lives in a large estate in England, and she does not fit in, and the identity of her mother is a sort of a secret. All 3 of these women have the ability to sort of get birds and bugs to listen to them, which is where you get the magical realism bit. And this very much feels like spring throughout. Very fun read. Also my nominee for best cover of the year. Next, we have Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the first book in the Legends of the First Empire series. I have not read the entire series yet, but I did very much enjoy this one, so I will continue. This is high fantasy. This is Tolkien-esque world-building fantasy level. I'll tell you why it feels so springish to me. This world that we are in, which is, I can't remember the name of the world, or if there even is one. It's divided into humankind and the Frey. And the Frey are extremely long-living creatures to the point that the humans believe they're gods. The book opens with a human accidentally killing one of them and realizing they are not actually immortal. The reason this feels like spring to me, first of all, it has a very pastoral setting, and we are in the woods a lot, and the trees are leafed out, and so you get that feeling, but also it feels very much like the beginning of a new world. I always say that the Fellowship of the Ring feels like autumn to me because it feels like the end of what's been happening. The elves are leaving. So unlike Tolkien, this feels very much like the beginning of a new world, and that's why I feel like it goes with spring. The next book I threw on kind of on a whim 45 minutes ago, and it's Small Angels by Lauren Owen. And the reason I put it in is because it's cottage gore, which is kind of a weird subgenre. It's gothic fiction in terms of its genre, but it's the feeling of the beautiful earth is actually out to get you. It takes place in a small town called Small Angels. There's a church there. There are multiple timelines that span over 100 years, and it's about this woods that is a living, breathing, solitary thing, and sort of the terror that it can inflict on people that go in the woods. So if this spring you are looking for something creepy, but also that has spring vibes, go with Small Angels. The next book I don't have. I owned it for a very long time and I think I lent it to a friend. And it's The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton. This book has a very special place in my heart because I'll never forget when I read it. I read it the week I got home from my honeymoon. So right after my husband and I got married. So that's like almost 12 years ago, question mark. When did we get married? Yeah, almost 12 years ago. This is kind of like The Secret Garden for grown-ups. And if you've ever read a Kate Morton, she has like a particular outline she uses, and this doesn't stray from it. So we have Cassandra, and her grandmother Nell has just died, and she's going through the grieving process, but she's also sort of gained a mystery. Nell had a crazy thing happen, and that is when she was a very small child, she got off a boat in Australia that had come from England alone, and no one knew where she came from, and she was holding a book of extremely dark fairy tales. And Cassandra decides to try to figure out where her grandma came from. And it's a great mystery, historical, journalism feel. Like if you like reading about research, which obviously I do as a librarian, this is a great one to just sort of sink your teeth into. I still remember the conclusion perfectly, which I thought was done beautifully. And it definitely has that like, sort of like sinister garden feel, but it's not as dark as Small Angels. You still get more of the spring feel of it. Enjoy. Next up I have Mame by Jessica George, which I also read really recently, and it is a contemporary fiction. And the reason I put this one in for your spring vibes, the cover is very spring. The bright pink, the bright green, the bright yellow is very spring, but also I felt like the subject matter had a very much spring feel to it. Our main character is Maddie, and she is in her 20s, but she doesn't really live a normal 20-something life. She lives in London and she takes care of her father who has Parkinson's. Her mother lives in Ghana and visits occasionally, but pretty much everything's on Maddie. The financial responsibility, her mother asks her to send her money even though she's taking care of her father, and it's a lot of stress for her. She has a job she doesn't really like. Suddenly her mom says she's going to come back to London and take care of her dad, and Maddie can kind of move on with her life. And so she embarks on being a 20-something. She gets an apartment with a bunch of people she doesn't really know and gets a new job and tries to figure her life out from there. So it has those beginning feelings as well, which I really liked. Just so you know, this book is very, very sad in the middle, but I would say it ends very hopefully. I did cry very hard. Beautifully written. I'll definitely read another book by Jessica George. I heartily recommend her as an author. Also, if you want just like to read a really good book that perfectly encapsulates what it feels like to be in your 20s, Mame is great for that. So I started this video telling you I was going to have mostly modern books on it, and I do, but I did have to stick one classic on it, and it's Emma by Jane Austen. A lot of Jane Austen's books feel like spring, not all of them, but Emma for me is the one that feels the most like spring. And I do think I'm slightly colored by the fact that the 2020 version of Emma like explodes spring. If you haven't seen it, the one with Anya Taylor-Joy, it is like hits you over the head with spring. And since it's come out, I've watched it every spring, and I haven't watched it yet this year. And it's April, so I think it's a perfect time to watch it. Emma is the story of Jane Austen's only wealthy heroine. She is an only child, she has money, she doesn't have to get married, and all she wants to do is meddle in other people's love lives. And she has kind of a best friend neighbor, Mr. Knightley, who does not like that she meddles in people's love lives. I really like Emma. She's like the original unlikable heroine, but I think that makes her character growth better. If you start amazing, it's hard to grow from that. It's a great book. If you don't feel like picking up a classic, I would really recommend watching one of the film versions because they're all really good. I mean, I'm partial to the Gwyneth Paltrow one because that was my mom's favorite, so we watched it a ton when I was growing up. But this new one is also very, very good. Now let's do a couple romances. I feel like a lot of Regency romance has spring vibes like the entire Bridgerton series does, but here are some other ones. The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare is fantastic. It's book 3 in the Girl Meets Duke series. You should read the whole thing because the series is phenomenal. But in this one, we have Penny as our heroine, and she's obsessed with animals. She lives in like a fancy townhouse in London and has like farm animals living there. And most of them have something sort of like wrong with them, and that's why she's taking care of them. And then we have Chase, who's like a newly wealthy man and wants to establish some credibility for himself in London. So he buys a townhouse next to like a proper English lady, thinking that she's a proper English lady. And people will be like, oh, how nice that he lives in that neighborhood. And Penny is anything but a proper English lady. And Tasha Tudor writes kind of like quirky, zany type heroines that I really enjoy. And I really, really loved this story. It was super fun. I really want to reread it, and I lent it to my sister I think 12 months ago, probably close to a year ago, and I'm gonna ask her if she'll give it back to me. Next, I've got The Rake Gets Ravished by Sophie Jordan. I have this on my Kindle, so there's a picture of it. And this is book 2 in her Duke Hunt series, and I loved this book so much. This is one of the best openings I think I've ever read. So Mercy is our heroine, and she is not wealthy, and her brother has gambled away the deed to their house and property, and she is so pissed, like a sister would be. And coming from someone who has 2 brothers who make bad choices sometimes, never this bad, I understand. She decides to go to the gambling hall where he lost their house, and she's gonna steal the deed back. She does have to break into the private apartments of the gambling hall owner. And when she does that, he happens upon her. And she kind of has this moment where he gives her like an out. And she decides instead to seduce him and steal the deed. He wakes up the next morning, having had the best night of his life, and is like, where did she go? And then notices the deed is missing and is like, I'm going to find her. This is the book I read by Sophie Jordan where I was like, oh, I love Sophie Jordan as an author. This was the one that was like, this isn't just like a author I enjoy. I love her. Okay, I have to recommend an entire series next, but it's an easy one to get through, and it is the Lore Olympus books. Now, are these set during spring? Sort of. Persephone, who is our heroine, is the goddess of spring. And these are the very slow burn age gap love story between Persephone and Hades. Here's the thing. I usually don't like Hades Persephone retellings because I am a mythology kid and he is her uncle and he kidnaps and rapes her in Greek mythology. But these ones feel so far removed that I don't mind. And also there's no, some of the Hades Persephone romance retellings have a little bit of that flavor. This has nothing like that in it. Here's also why you should read them in spring. The palette, the blue and the pink palette is just perfection for this time of year. You just get such good imagery, so much fun. So that's the first one, volume 1, Lore Olympus. Here's the second one, volume 2. Let me see if I can get a good page. I like the mint is red because she kind of clashes with the blue. Oh, that's a very good spring page though. And then the third volume is this one. And the fourth one's coming out soon. I think it's coming out this summer. I have an alert to remind me when it comes out. But there you get Persephone looking very springy with her flower crown. They're just great. They're really, really relaxing, fun graphic novel reads. I have another graphic novel, which I got an ARC for a couple of years ago. And it's the graphic novel version of The Secret Garden. And obviously The Secret Garden is the kids' book spring vibes classic. This was such a good, not retelling, but reimagining. And my daughter and I read it together, the ARC, 3 times, I think. She loved it so much. And it was a great introduction to the story. We love The Secret Garden in this house. We watched the movie version that came out in the 90s. I can't remember what year, but I saw it in the theater when I was a kid. Every year, I'll put a movie poster here so you can see it, in the end of February as a family, just sort of get us ready for spring. The Secret Garden is the first book that I ever partner read with my mom. That was a big kid book. So I have such a special place in my heart. And whenever people put things up online, what 3 fictional characters are you? I always say that I'm Mary from The Secret Garden as one of them. A crabby gardener. That's kind of me. I have one more kids book, and it's The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill, which I don't think is technically a kids book. But I did read it with my 7-year-old, and so I think of it kind of as a kids book. Full disclosure, this takes place over a calendar year. So there's a chapter that's spring, summer, autumn, winter. But spring definitely is the vibe of this book. And it's just about this place where dragons have little tea leaves that sprout on their ears and horns, and the people that take care of them. It's extremely exclusive in terms of race, gender, relationships, disabilities, anything you can think of. So if you're looking for something to read to a child that will kind of like introduce characters like this, I think it's a good choice. It's definitely got that like really nice cozy fantasy feel too, which I like a lot. So now those are all my recommendations, but I want to show you some things. So in March, I don't remember exactly when, I got really sick and all my kids were really sick. And one night my husband had to work until 10 p.m. and I was just like losing it because I just needed to go to bed, but I was taking care of my kids. And when I finally got all my kids settled and I got in bed, I opened up my computer and I went crazy on Amazon. And then I did pare back quite a bit. I think I had 15 books in my cart and I only ended up getting myself 3. I did get my kids some. But I wanted to get books that made me feel like spring. I wanted March to be over and the viruses that came with it to be over. So here's what I got. The first book I picked out was The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. And I heard about this first on Darlene Desi's channel, which I would say she's the best spring vibes person in the world. If you want to check her out, I'll put a link in the description. But this is a real diary of a woman who lived in the Edwardian period in London. And she was like really into nature and she would take notes about what was happening in nature around her. And she wasn't wealthy, but she was an artist. And so she also drew pictures. So there's a chapter for each month. And I've decided I'm going to read each month in the month. So as soon as I got it, I read January, February, and March. And now I'm in the middle of reading April and I will continue on. I'm going to show you the front page of April because it's very pretty. So there's her illustration for April. And it basically just tells you like what's in bloom and what they did and what animals she saw and what's hibernating and what's waking up. And it's so lovely, beautiful, and cozy. And my kids really enjoy looking at like their birthday months also to see what's happening in their birthday months, which is very fun. Next, I got a book used that I've been like hemming and hawing about buying for ages. And I don't know what took me so long, but it's Tasha Tudor's Garden. And Tasha Tudor's like the queen. She's the queen of the cottagecore movement. She is an illustrator and she's illustrated like, it is an insane amount of books. I don't know if it'll say like quickly where I can see it, but if you're not familiar with her, oh my gosh, I just realized this just fell out of the back. I haven't read the whole thing yet. There's like a photograph of her and her dog. That's beautiful. I might actually frame that and hang that up. Someone went and interviewed her at her house in her gardens and took a ton of pictures of her with her corgis. And it's a lovely book. I haven't gotten that far into it. I'm on page 46, but I'm just like reading it on nights when I need a little Tasha Tudor's Garden. The last thing I got for myself isn't so much spring as it is seasonal, but I got Time to Hygge, and it's an adult coloring book. And I also bought some brand new colored pencils to go with it. And some of the pictures are very fall, and some are very winter, and some are very spring, and some are very summer. But I've just been having a really good time slowly coloring this in. I've only done a few. I've ripped out a couple pages for my kids. I liked this one. This is the one I'm working on right now because every picture's in here twice. So I told my kids the first half of the book is for me, and then the second half are ones that I'll cut out for them so that they can also do these nice coloring books. And this is a series. It has a couple other books in it that I will definitely buy more of because first of all, I like doing adult coloring. I find it soothing. Second of all, I think it's fun for my kids to get to do coloring sheets that aren't like, you know, Disney or whatever, that are like a little bit more like grown up looking. It's fun for them. So that's the last thing I bought myself. I bought some kids books that I didn't bring down, but sometimes you just have to, when you're feeling like winter will never end, you just really have to give yourself a dose of spring in the form of retail therapy. I hope all these recommendations got you in a spring mood. I know I'm in a spring mood. It's very hot here today. We're having kind of summer in April. Yesterday was very hot too. It's going to be normal next week, like 50s and 60s, but it's 80 today. So when I finish, I am going to actually take my book and take it outside until my kids get home from school, which is a lovely way to spend an April afternoon. If you have a favorite spring read, please put it in the comments, especially if it is poetry, because I have been in such a poetry and philosophy reading mood lately. I am not sure why. I think it's just like the light academia crawling into me, which does tend to happen in the spring. But if you have a poetry recommendation, a philosophy recommendation, or just a general spring recommendation, please let me know it. If you do not want to write anything down, but you have made it this far in the video, I would love your flower emoji of choice since it is beautiful. My daffodils have bloomed. My crocuses were killed by the hail, but the daffodils hadn't opened yet, so they are all alive, and now I am patiently awaiting my tulips. As always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.